Well, good morning, you beautiful New Zealanders. We're not Aotearoa rights. Today we're in for a bit of an interesting time. I want to talk about the media and MPs and the Waitangi Tribunal and the courts. So those four areas today. You know what? The media tries very hard to give their audience the impression that the courts and the Waitangi Tribunal are gods, beyond reproach, and that their judgments are incontrovertible. That word means can't be argued with. Problem is, their judgments are often wrong, and they can be argued with. Problem is also that the courts and the Waitangi Tribunal, they've been hijacked. So what comes out of them is more often ideology and dogma, claptrap, rather than truth and justice. For example, the courts recently ruled that tikanga, that's Maori law, L-O-R-E, superstitions and beliefs be given official status as the first law of New Zealand. Can you believe it? KC Gary Judd argues strongly against it. He says it's absolutely wrong. Another example, the courts are, they are about to give all the beaches of New Zealand to Maori. This was never what was Parliament intended, but the courts are going to do it anyway. See, the courts are out of their lane, overstepping the mark. But there is another more serious problem with our courts. What's that? Their judgments can sometimes be ambiguous, and by the way, a court's judgment should never be ambiguous. Courts are supposed to bring clarity, but they're ambiguous. And this ambiguity can lead to serious problems. For example, Chris Luxon believes the treaty is a partnership.
So what does tino rangatiratanga mean to you?
Well, it doesn't mean co-governance to me. It means actually partnership, and it means Māori having authority over their taonga and their treasure and their land.
Well, Chris is not the sharpest pencil in the box, we know that. He has misunderstood what Judge Robin Cook said in 1987. Cook did not say the treaty was a partnership, nor was it. He said it was, quote, akin to a partnership, unquote. An apple is akin to an orange in that they both grow on trees, but an apple is not an orange. Come on. Another judge, Judge Anthony Willey, unpicked Judge Robin Cook's judgment and explained how Judge Cook never intended the treaty to be viewed as a partnership, but Chris has done it anyway. You know what? Luxon is a very slippery character. He has an agenda to Maorify New Zealand, which is what he did with Air New Zealand, and he wants to progress co-governance, and he uses Robin Cook's, quote, the treaty is a partnership idea to justify his actions. In other words, instead of studying the treaty himself to come to his own conclusions, which would require work and effort, he has conveniently cherry-picked a particular court ruling, misinterpreted it, and is using it to justify his personal desire to progress co-governance and Maorification. That's the truth. And we are all suffering as a result of what he's done. That is to say, under Luxon, the Maorification of New Zealand and co-governance are progressing at speed, and thus so is apartheid, racism and separatism. If we combine court rulings which are deliberately wrong, and I gave the tikanga example, the loss of our beaches, with court rulings that are ambiguous, and I gave the example of Justice Cook and the idea that the treaty is a partnership, with treaty ignorance among MPs, disastrous things happen. In this video, I'm going to show that when MPs default to the courts and the Waitangi Tribunal, they open themselves up to making big, costly mistakes for the whole of the country. I'm going to show you how the courts and the Waitangi Tribunal have been hijacked by activists. I'm going to show you how in turn the courts and the Waitangi Tribunal have been deliberately feeding treaty ignorant MPs misinformation about the treaty. For example, the Waitangi Tribunal putting the case to MPs that Maori and Northland did not cede sovereignty. It's hard to believe, but they did so. This is patently untrue. Maori definitely ceded sovereignty in the treaty. But MPs won't know what the Waitangi Tribunal is feeding them as false because they themselves are treaty ignorant. You see the problem? So I'm going to put a case to you that MPs should not be allowed to be MPs without attaining a certain level of proficiency in their understanding of the treaty. All other professions have to study and graduate if they want to practice, so why don't MPs? It's totally nuts. I'm going to show you how the media wants the public to drink in what the courts and the Waitangi Tribunal say about the treaty as being authoritative. In other words, the media is constantly grooming the New Zealand public with the idea that the courts and the Waitangi Tribunal are gods who must be believed and cannot be disbelieved. We must see through what they're doing. It's absolute crap. So let's dive into this and explore today's topic.
But what for the so-called treaty principles?
To begin this morning, here's One News Māori Affairs correspondent, Te Aniwa Huri Hanganui.
In the 1980s, the courts needed to start interpreting the treaty in order to make judgments.
Okay, so the reporter here says, quote, in the 1980s, the court needed to start interpreting the treaty in order to make judgments, unquote. The so-called, quote, need to do this was for political reasons, not to clarify the meaning of the treaty at all. You see, libraries of books have been written on the treaty and what it means. Why didn't the politicians consult these books and come to their own conclusions? In other words, do some serious study? Well, there's several answers. One is ignorance. MPs were too lazy to seriously study the treaty, so had no choice but to leave it to the courts. But really, this is no excuse if you think about it. If the treaty is our founding document, the basis of major decisions being made on behalf of the whole country, the basis of billions of dollars of taxpayer money being paid out, MPs should not be allowed to enter Parliament without undergoing serious study of the treaty, without a certain level of proficiency in the treaty. After all, when you think about it, all other professions require their people to undergo training in their particular field before being let loose to outwork their profession in the public arena. Is this not true? Think about it. Doctors, nurses, electricians, plumbers, builders, hairdressers, they've all got to do a course because you got to know what the hell you're doing. That's the reason you do the course. So why aren't MPs having to do this with the treaty? That's a good question. There is a second reason MPs gave the courts the responsibility to tell them what the treaty was saying. What's that? Well, MPs might have thought the subject was too controversial. By letting the courts decide, they could pass the buck if things went wrong by saying, quote, oh, this is what the court said and this is what we are going on, unquote. So really, that was a lack of courage. Number 3, there is a third reason why MPs gave the courts the responsibility to tell them what the treaty was saying. MPs were too busy, caught up in the work of their portfolios, so they did not have time to seriously study the treaty. Again, there's no excuse. No one should be allowed, as I said, to enter Parliament without proficiency in their understanding of the treaty, our founding document. To let MPs make gigantic decisions involving billions of taxpayer dollars without having a thorough knowledge of the treaty is like letting someone rewire a house without any training. The idea is ridiculous, isn't it? To be an electrician, one must have 3 years training, and rightly so. It's equally ridiculous that MPs are allowed to be MPs without a thorough knowledge of the treaty. You know what? Doubtless all of these reasons why MPs gave the courts the responsibility to tell them what the treaty was saying were in the mix. But there's a fourth reason, the main reason, the overriding reason, why the courts were invited to rule on the meaning of the treaty. And what is that reason? Here it is. Well, Maori activists could not make the treaty say what they wanted it to say. You see, the plain meaning of the treaty is so clear. So Maori activists outside Parliament lobbied MPs, not necessarily Maori MPs. Geoffrey Palmer, for example, Labour MP in the 80s, was not Maori, but he was an out-and-out activist. No doubt about that. And bureaucrats. So these activists outside of Parliament, they lobbied bureaucrats and MPs inside Parliament to appoint activist judges onto the judiciary. They also lobbied MPs and bureaucrats to appoint activists onto the Waitangi Tribunal. Once these activist judges were in place, and once activist Waitangi Tribunal members were in place, making the treaty say what the activists wanted it to say was going to be easy, and that's exactly what happened. What's really interesting is that in New Zealand, Parliament is supreme. Parliament, you know what, can overrule any and all rulings made by either a court or the Waitangi Tribunal. Yet MPs show great reluctance to overrule court rulings or Waitangi Tribunal findings. Why? Mostly they lack courage. They're frightened to death of Maori. That's the truth. The main reason why MPs don't overrule the courts and the tribunal is that, as I've said, they don't know enough about the treaty themselves. They're ignorant, treaty ignorant. So they are at the mercy of the judges and the Waitangi Tribunal findings. MPs can't, quote, fact check the court rulings or the Waitangi Tribunal findings because they have little or no knowledge of the treaty themselves. Can you see the problem we have here? New Zealand is imploding because of MP treaty ignorance and lack of courage in leadership. To understand what I'm saying here, I need to explain how judges are appointed in New Zealand and how Waitangi tribunals are appointed. So watch this carefully. So how are judges appointed in New Zealand? Well, let's go through this. They're appointed by the Governor-General on the recommendation of the Attorney-General. So the key question then is, who appoints the Governor-General? The answer is the King or Queen of England appoints them on the recommendation of the Prime Minister. Next question, so you have the Prime Minister through the Governor-General, through the Attorney-General. Who appoints the Attorney-General? Again, it's the Prime Minister. Now, we've had a string of activist prime ministers in the last, as long as you can remember. Chris Luxon is an activist prime minister, and I've done a whole series on him. You know, to go back through our video channel and have a look at those because they're absolutely eye-opening. And before him, Jacinda Ardern, we knew all about her. She was very much into Maorification and co-governance and giving away New Zealand to Maori activists. And then before her, there was John Key, and he had the Attorney General was Chris Finlayson, who was the devil incarnate. He was actually working against the whole of New Zealand, shoveling money and assets to iwi like there was no tomorrow, and on it went. And so if you have an activist prime minister, then you get an activist governor general, and then if you get an activist governor general, you get an activist attorney general, and then you get activist judges, and then you get Treaty of Waitangi corruption, which is what's been going on for 50 years, truly. Well, how are members of the Waitangi Tribunal appointed in New Zealand? The Governor General appoints them on the recommendation of the Minister of Maori Development. This time it's a little bit different. The key question is who appoints the Governor General? We know that the King or Queen of England appoints them on the recommendation of the Prime Minister. Who appoints the Minister of Maori Development? It's the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister is the key person, and if you get an activist Prime Minister, then you get an activist Minister of Maori Development, and then you get an activist Waitangi Tribunal members, and what do you get from that? You get the Treaty of Waitangi corruption. Again, this is what's been going on for 50 years. Activists have deliberately loaded the Waitangi Tribunal with activists, and they've deliberately loaded the judiciary with activists. Who are the activists inside the National Party right now? The worst one by far is TAMA Potaka. I put his master's thesis inside the description of this video so you can have a look at it. It's an activist manifesto. He is an out-and-out activist, and Chris Luxon headhunted him to do the job. So under national, Maorification and co-governance are on turbo, believe me. Chris Luxon is a activist. There's no doubt about that. So you might be at home thinking, oh my goodness, things are really bad here. And they are bad. They're really bad. So what is the solution? The absolute solution is to vote in a strong, no-nonsense Prime Minister who has courage, has fortitude, knows the treaty, has a deep conviction to restore democracy, who will fight against racism and apartheid, who will fight for equality, who is not afraid of upsetting people, is strong and principled. We have to find that man or woman. The future of our country depends on this. See you next video. Please share this video with everyone everywhere. The mainstream media should be reporting on the issues I am raising in these videos, but they're not. Why aren't they? Well, they're corrupt. Why are they corrupt? They are collaborating with Maori activists. There's no doubt about that. In the final analysis, the people of New Zealand, that's us, have ultimate power, not the politicians. Did you know that? The people can kick out the people in power and they can put them into power. How are we going to do that? Well, awareness is the key to change. If enough people in New Zealand become aware of the issues I am raising, we can save this beautiful country. So share these videos everywhere so that come the next election, we can vote the right people in and kick out the people who are destroying New Zealand.